All right, let's take a look at the next page. So now we're looking at these function operations, and instead of having equations, we're going to be using the graphs. So this graph says if 4 goes into the F graph, what comes out? So 1, 2, 3, 4 in, and this point is going to be my output. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 comes out. All right, 0 goes in and 1 comes out. Here's that point right there. For number 3, 0 goes into, oh look, it's G now, which means we need to use this one, and 1, 2, 3, 4 comes out. So this next line is where we're solving for the output, not the input. Here we're given the input and we have to find the output. Given the input, we find output. This is backwards. So 0 came out, which means that's my Y value of G. So here are an output of 0, which means I could have put a -2 or a value of 2 in. All right, so -2 came out of f of x. So I go to a y value of -2, and it looks like a 3 is what went in. If a 3 came out of x, 1, 2, 3, when we're or out of g, what could have gone in? Both +1 and -1. All right, so now we have these operations. So f plus g of 1. So f of 1 is equal to 1 goes in, 2 comes out. G of 1 is equal to 1 goes in, 1, 2, 3 comes out. And when I add them together, 3 plus 2 is 5. All right, f of 2. 2 is an input, gives me 1, 2, 3 is an output. F of -5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, minus that output is -4. So minus a negative is going to give me 7. All right, now I want the product of f of 1. So this is going to be f of 1 times g of 1. So f of 1 is 2, and g of 1 is 1, 2, 3. So their product is going to be 6. So this is now a composition of a function f of g of -2, which means I go find g of -2. So -2 comes out, so that means it's going to be f of 0, because if a -2 goes in, 0 comes out, and f of 0 is 1. These are asking the same thing, but it's g of f of 1. So we're going to put 1 into f, and 2 comes out. So then I want a g of 2, and that's going to be 0. 2 goes in, 0 comes out. All right, so f of g of 1, which means f of g of 1, which means I'm going to start here and put 1 into g, and I get a 3 out, which means then I want f of 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's going to be that answer. Those answers are a little hard to see. They're kind of smushed in to that worksheet. Hopefully, if you're doing this on paper, your work is more spread out. Is F 1 to 1? Yes, because if you look at the graph, it definitely passes the horizontal line test. However, G does not. So no, G is not 1 to 1. All right. So in our next lesson, we're going to be talking about how to find the inverse. And these inverse notes, when we're finding the inverse, really all we're doing is swapping our x and y values. If a function's 1 to 1, the inverse will be a function. And think about how that affects my horizontal and my vertical line tests. Okay, so with the inverses of f of x and g of x above be functions, f of x would be yes, because it was 1 to 1. G of x would be no, because it wasn't 1 to 1. All right, so when we look at these functions, we have the functions and the inverse. And I want you to think about, here's my input value. And if you look here, when we talk about the inverse, that is this function's output value. So when we list the domain of our f function, we end up with all of those input values, -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. The range of our initial function, -5, -3, -1, 1, and 3. So that's this story here. When I talk about the domain of my inverse, notice it's going to be what was the range, because I switched them. When I want the range of my inverse, that's going to be what was the domain of my other graph. So what do you notice? That the domain and range are reversed for inverses. All right, using the tables above, fine. So an input of -2 gives an output of -5. An input of 0 gives an output of -1. An input of -5 in my inverse is going to give me an output of -2. So we can see this relationship here between these two. See this relationship here with our inverse? Our domain and our ranges are switched. So the inverse, when I have an input of -1, is 0, which is the same as if I had looked at -1 being the outcome. Okay, good job. Stick with it. We're going to do more inverses in just a minute.